were swimming competitively in the more sophisticated programs with the Amateur Athletic Union. The Jewish Welfare Board, known as the JWB, only had a competitive swimming program for circumcised boys. I'm just missing page 2. Here we go. The Y in Paterson played a very significant role in the Jewish experience growing up in Paterson, which had a huge, vibrant Jewish community in the 50s and 60s. The synagogues were for worship and education. It was never about athletics. It was understood that venue was for the Y. Of course, the big sports were basketball, baseball, and football, but the Y in Paterson had an indoor pool, and they had a swim team with dual meets, and they had a national competitive meet that they called the airmail meet, where they would send in your times to compete against other people in your age group in certain events. And I succeeded in swimming, and my prowess enabled me to stand out from my peers, who are basically football, basketball, and baseball players, and also stickball and stoopball and punchball, because remember, Paterson was more like the inner city than suburban communities. And my success in swimming resulted in my competing first locally and then throughout the state, New Jersey, and the JWB airmail meet throughout the country, and eventually nationally and internationally. I literally traveled the world at a very young age to compete. And when I say the world, I competed for the United States in the Maccabiah Games in 1961 in Israel as the youngest male on the U.S. contingency, and again in 1965. And I was recognized nationally as an All-American high school swimmer and subsequently as an All-American college swimmer. In the process, I became disciplined, tenacious, and obnoxious. Keep in mind, competitive swimming is a very demanding sport. Even at a young age, one had to train 3 or 4 times a week. And eventually, if one excelled, that became 6 times a week and oftentimes twice a day. There is an expression that champions are made in practice, and it's very true in this sport. Practice was about technique, training, and pushing yourself and figuring out just how much pain one could endure before you passed out. And for those who excel in practice and do the twice a day, 6-day-a-week routine, they tend to weed out the youngsters that weren't serious or had other distractions. So what remained were more or less fanatics. Another expression in the swimming community is if football were tough, they would call it swimming. So in my career, I competed hundreds of times and have a house full of medals adorning the walls in our indoor natatorium that spill into other rooms in the house. As I said, I competed locally throughout the state, nationally, oftentimes setting backstroke records, which was my event. Today, when I compete, and I still do in the master's program, I swim freestyle, middle distance. That's the crawl, it's kind of like this, as well as backstroke. That program starts at age 25. If you aren't familiar with it, Lydia has a good way of describing what masters means, and a little bit of Yiddish. It's for altercockers. And I've been swimming in the master's program seriously since I was 43. I'm now 77, so you can do the arithmetic. And have been and continue to be ranked internationally, usually in the top 5 and sometimes 1 or 2 in my age group, primarily in the middle distance freestyle events. Prior to joining the Y team in Paterson, I don't recall any formal swimming lessons. but I do vividly remember the day I learned to swim at my parents' swim club in Wayne, New Jersey, when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And one of my boyhood friends pushed me off an inner tube that we were sharing in deep water, and it was literally sink or swim. I chose to swim and eventually found myself very comfortable in the water. In fact, I wasn't that comfortable on land, so it was a great retreat for me. My introduction to competitive swimming was probably when I was about 8 years old at the Patterson Y, when I tried out for a basketball team. They called it biddy basketball. And the coach who watched me play must have known something I didn't, because when he watched me dribble and shoot, he ended up encouraging me to try out for the swim team. And I did with much success. About a year later, my father and one of the parents of one of the other boys entered me and the other boy in a novice swim meet at the Newark YMCA. Novice for that competition meant that you had never competed before in an AAU, Amateur Athletic Union competition, or YMCA. They were much higher level than our JWB Y meets. And I won the 50 backstroke event. I came in like third or fourth in the 50 freestyle. I don't remember, but it was a real memorable day because I came home with a medal to show off to all of my relatives. While I didn't know it then, that was the beginning of my swimming career. Shortly thereafter, I tried out for the Eastside High School football team as a freshman. I think I was 13, and somehow avoided the cut and was very excited. But my wise mother astutely ruled that football was not in my universe over my strenuous objection. She didn't want me playing that violent game where I was liable to get hurt. And she was much more intent on encouraging me to pursue swimming, where I had already excelled. I hated her for that. Eventually, as I smartened up, I loved her for that, because sticking with swimming put me on a path to success. Growing up in Patterson in the 50s and 60s was really more of an inner city than suburban experience. In the inner city high school I attended had no pool, and schools that didn't have pools generally did not have swim teams. But my high school somehow fortuitously had 4 outstanding swimmers. 2 came from the Patterson YMHA, including myself, and 2 came from the Patterson YMCA. Fortuitously, again, each one of those 4 swimmers excelled in a different stroke, and there were only 4 strokes in swimming. So even without a team, we ended up having the best medley relay team in the state of New Jersey. Now, let me explain when I find my place. When I find my place. The suburban schools that had pools would compete against other schools and what we would call dual meets. And once a year, they would all converge at Princeton in their swimming facility, their pool, for the state meet. And 2 weeks later, they would converge again for the Eastern Interscholastic Swimming Championships, which really encompassed the entire East Coast. And the 4 of us from Eastside High School who didn't have a team were eligible to compete in that meet because it wasn't a dual meet. But since we didn't have a team, we had to go out and find a coach, which we did. We recruited a faculty member. We had to arrange for insurance, which we did with the help of our parents. And we came and we went and we conquered. We participated in our individual events and our strokes, and then we won the medley relay in the state. Myself as the backstroker, the other Jewish swimmer from the Patterson YMHA, Bob Reines as the breaststroker, Phil Riker from the YMCA as a butterflyer, who later made the Olympic team in 1964 in the butterfly event, and Steve Rerich, the freestyler, who also became an Olympian in 1968 at the Mexico City Olympic Games. So that was a real big thing for us, and that's how I ended up becoming a high school All-American. But that was really our sophomore and junior year. By my senior year, the other three boys left and went to prep school. And I was left behind at Eastside High School, but I was still able to enter the state meet, but no relay. And I won the 100 backstroke my senior year and set a state record that stood for many years. And then 2 weeks later, when I went to the Easterns, I got touched out and came in second. And I was really on my way at that point. But I'm going to go backwards a little bit chronologically to kind of fill in the gap after the success in the novice meet. I became a standout swimmer at the Patterson YMHA, but as I said, that was really local stuff, small potatoes. And they had a swim coach come once a week to the YMHA from a team, a real serious amateur athletic union team that operated out of Wayne. The coach was Bob Alexander. He was affectionately referred to as Mr. A. And he had a really serious organization. And he spotted my talent and recruited me to come swim with his team. I say recruited, he didn't poach. I still was a swimmer at the Patterson YMHA, but I was also swimming with his group. And I went from 2 or 3 times a week to 6 times a week with his group. He was a quirky guy, and he believed that everybody had to be a specialist. And I was a backstroker, so he only let me swim backstroke, which in hindsight, I regret. Other serious swimmers were much more diversified, and there was just a lot more that you could do. But that was back in 1961. Things were very different then. And in that year, Mr. A, who was a Gentile, was tapped to be the coach of the U.S. Maccabees swimming team for the games in Israel that year, as I was really coming into my own. And not because he was the coach, but because I had done well and I was a Jewish swimmer. I qualified to swim on the U.S. team for the Maccabee games that year. And Mr. A was the coach. So that was, quite a big thing in the community. Got a lot of publicity, a lot of attention, a lot of kudos. And I didn't know it then, but ironically, some of the swimmers for the Israeli contingency, and there were Jewish swimmers from all over the world, I later turned out to become friendly with through swimming, an international competition. First time was in Palo Alto at Stanford University, I think in 2007. I was there with a few other people from this area, 2 of whom were also Jewish swimmers. And so, of course, we gravitated to the Israeli team and we became fast friends. And the World Championships are held every 2 years. So I think that was in 2007. The next time I saw the Israeli swimmers was in 2010 at the World Championships. These are the Masters program in Gothenburg, Sweden. And then 2 years later in Vincione, Italy. So at this point, we became friendly, and none of us knew that we had actually met some 50 years earlier. So for some reason, every once in a while, I get a nostalgia twinge, and I go back and look at my memorabilia, which I brought, and I even have the program from the 61 games. And I start summing through it one night at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. And there I saw each of their names. They were, competing against me and against our team. Lo and behold, I scanned it and sent it to them in Israel. And the following year, when we were in Israel, this trip was Lydia and I, as opposed to our whole family. One of my swimming buddies was celebrating his 65th birthday in Israel, which was really the reason for the trip. And we invited the Israeli swimmers who, came to the party outside of Tel Aviv at a tennis center. And at that point, we were talking like we were friends for 60 years, which we were. We just had a 50-year hiatus. So that was a great thrill. And I thought warrants a little comment. And the program from 1961 games is actually with me today. Another event that's noteworthy with respect to my swimming career and my Jewish identity, and going to the Maccabi Games in 1961 really helped solidify my Jewish identity. But before the team left for Israel in 61, the U.S. Committee for Sports in Israel had all the swimmers converge at Kutcher's Country Club. You all know about Kutcher's in the Borscht Belt. And we were there for a week. They housed us in the servants' quarters, and they had a pretty nice pool. And every day we would train, and all of the guests at Kutcher's would fan around us in the pool and make a big deal over us, and we got to know each other. And one of the other swimmers who I met at Kutcher's before we went was from Cincinnati, Ohio, who I bonded with quickly. And here I was, 15 years old, about to hop on a plane in a few days. I'd never flown before for 12 hours without any parental guidance, which of course I didn't think I needed. And my parents were thrilled to learn that this fella, Jerry Sapidin, told them he would watch out for me. That's all my parents needed to hear. And then they loved him for life. And we became fast friends. The reason why it's significant, because all of us had fast friends when we were growing up, is when I was about to graduate high school, he encouraged me to apply to the University of Cincinnati and join their swimming team. And I applied. I was accepted, and because of my swimming achievements, got an athletic scholarship, which was a huge thing and a big help to my family. Most of my friends growing up went to college locally, Rutgers and Fairleigh Dickinson, and lived at home. Tuition was cheaper. And this was a big thing for me to leave. And it turned out that the University of Cincinnati and I were a good fit. I had not previously excelled academically in school, but when I got to Cincinnati, I knew I had to get serious about academics to maintain my scholarship. I needed a minimum of a 3.0 grade average. And I took care of business and did well. And I did well in the pool. My freshman year, I broke the pool records at the university. And I actually had the fastest times in the country for backstroke, my backstroke events as a freshman. And what's significant about that, back then, the NCAA Division I schools, you couldn't compete as a freshman. You had to wait till your second year to compete on varsity. So when there'd be a dual meet between Cincinnati and we swam Indiana University, which was the top swimming school in the country back then. An hour before the varsity meet, they'd have the freshmen compete with the other freshmen. And they, kept records, and I had the fastest time that year. So it was a real big deal in both of my events. My times had really dropped once I got to college. And by my sophomore year, I was already an All-American, which is the top 10 in your stroke. And I moved up, became better than top 10, but that was a real big deal. And because I had done well academically and done well in the pool, my scholarship the first year was a partial scholarship, they were able to advance it to a full scholarship. So it was room, board, tuition, books, and some money for laundry, et cetera. And that was really helpful for my family. It was just a real big thing. But the problem was the coach that had recruited me, who I really admired and who was my mentor and was responsible for me dropping my times and doing so well my freshman year, either retired or got fired. That's not poetry. I just don't know what happened. But at the beginning of my second year, we were told he was gone. And they had to replace him, of course. And they hired a high school coach who was a nice man, but lacked the skills that somebody at my level, and we had a few other good swimmers there, really needed. In hindsight, I probably should have transferred to another school with a sophisticated swimming program and coach, which I needed. But I didn't know that he was not going to have the skills that I needed, although I was really disappointed that Paul Hartlaub had left so suddenly. And I include that in my talk today because I was really self-coached for the next 3 years, which were a critical time in my swimming career, between 19 and 22, when you really reach your prime. And I did well, but I think I could have done much better than well had I had, proper coaching. And before I knew it, I was a senior, and I was maintaining my All-American status every year, but and being a standout swimmer, but never really rising to the pinnacle where I wanted to be. And in 1964, I'm going to digress for a minute because I'm going to go full circle and come back to 1967 in a second. I was 19 years old. I was still, 19, almost 20. And I qualified to swim in the Olympic trials. That year, the Olympics were in Tokyo. And at this point, I had been swimming with the AAU club out of Wayne and in the summertime, and really training seriously in Cincinnati during the indoor season. And I just missed the team by 0.6 of a second. Ironically, 3 swimmers from my AAU club made the team. There's a photo there of about 10 of us that were all trying out that year. And I missed by 0.6 of a second. And the other 2 backstrokers on the team, who both made it and ended up winning gold in Tokyo and setting world records. So I was really third fiddle, but behind the 2 world champions and that event. So the next Olympics were 68, which I thought would be my year. At that point, both of those guys, Jed Graff and Thompson Mann, both of them had retired. And so 67, I had to make a decision when I graduated college. Was I going to find a place to swim for the next year and just train seriously for the Olympics in 68, or move on with my life? In 67, I had finished 7th out of the top 10 in my event, in the backstroke events. So in order to make the Olympic team, they take the top 3. So I had to move up 4 notches. I thought I was capable of doing it if I got to the right place with the right coach. But it meant I had to find a place to swim. I had to find a sponsor. Back then, you had to be an amateur. You couldn't take any money. So I had to find a sponsor. And I didn't make a concerted effort because I just really didn't even know how to go about it. And at the same time, I'd been accepted to a prominent law school in Washington, George Washington University. And I had to make a decision. And one day it was, I'm moving to Southern California, where I'm going to train for the 68 Olympics. The next day it was, I'm going to law school. Nobody in my family ever even went to college. Nobody in the extended family had really even graduated college. And it was a big deal and for me to be going to law school. So eventually, it's kind of like the flip of a coin. I decided I was going to law school. And my swimming career really ended, but it ended for 99% of these competitive swimmers, from boys, young men at 22 in your senior year in college back then, because it was all amateur. It's long since changed. And so when you were 22, you were done. So a swimmer that was 23 or 24 was considered old, even though today some of the world record holders are in their early 30s. Michael Phelps swam till he was 32. Dara Torres swam till she was 43. But back then, men were done at 22, and women, they were done at 18. That was before Title VII, when there was no athletic programs for women. So they finished in high school, and they did not swim in college. And so things were really different. And so it wasn't like I could come back if I didn't like law school. It was, you were done. So I always had some regrets, but it would have been a long shot gamble. I could have trained really hard at great expense. I didn't come from a moneyed family, and done nothing but swim for that entire season, 67 and 68, and not made the team. So who knows what would have happened, but that was the decision. So here I thought I was really done swimming, but I guess not to my surprise, I wasn't done swimming, because swimming's addictive. It's been the great elixir for me. And if I don't swim for 2 or 3 days, my body feels the difference. My brain knows the difference. So when I was in Washington, I found a pool, happened to be a YMHA, not that far from where I was living, and I would swim once or twice a week to try and maintain my sanity. But 1967, 68 was a turbulent, exciting time to be in Washington, D.C., where a lot of things was happening. It was the age of Aquarius. Allen Ginsberg, a Pattersonian, Timothy Leary. If they weren't smoking banana peels, then it was they're smoking pot or taking LSD. The music was changing. The social norms were changing. It was a real exciting place to be. The big march on the Pentagon that year was in Washington. Of course, I was front and center there. And I would still find some time to swim. But it was tough to deal with the rigors of being a first-year law student during those turbulent times, coming from the background that I did, because I was pretty much sheltered in high school and college because I was always swimming. So I wasn't out there on the social scene, on the cultural scene. And here I was suddenly thrust into all of those things that were happening. So I finished my first year of law school and dropped out for 3 years to kind of cope with my identity crisis. And in the interim, lo and behold, I found myself at the Woodstock Festival. That was in 1969. And as a result, I then became a rock impresario and promoting rock concerts for the next 2 years. But wherever I was doing that, I always found a pool, and I'd always find a place to swim. And when I returned to Washington 3 years later to resume my second year of law school at age 25, I was eligible to compete in the master's program because it starts at age 25. Today, 25 is still serious world-class swimming time. But back then, as I said, you were through at 22. So I became a master swimmer, really starting when I was in my second year of law school in Washington. There was a local pool in the area where I would train. And so I had a little hiatus. But masters, once some of us get real serious, it's not like it was when you had an athletic scholarship at a university and competing and being the center of attention and trying out for the Olympics. It was more like a hobby, but a hobby where the participants were fanatics, and fanatics about holding on to their youth and trying to stay healthy, and not a bad addiction as things go. So after that, I eventually finished law school and came back to New Jersey. Eventually met Lydia and settled down, and was still trying to find places to swim. And when we built our first home in Mahwah, we've within 2 months of moving in, we had no pool. We built a pool. But it was a backyard pool, so it really wasn't a competitive pool where I could really get serious. So I guess about 10, 15 years later, we built our second home, a vacation home in St. John, where we still have a home, and we built a lap pool. It was the biggest pool on the island. It was 60 feet by 8 feet. So can we panic now? But we were in St. John all of maybe 4 weeks a year, so it still wasn't a pool that I could tap into and utilize that much. And when we built our home in Franklin Lakes about 20 years ago, we built a real pool. It's 75-foot lap pool. It's 20 feet wide, and it's very high tech. By high tech, what I mean is it's designed to avoid turbulence. And that's real important for competitive swimmers to be in a smooth environment. And in order to do that, the pool really has to be designed to either absorb. So our pool stays flat. It's designed so the waves wash right out of the pool. And it's really phenomenal pool. And as a result of that pool, we've got more friends than we need or want. Because all of the swimming people I know from our swimming days that are still competing in the master's program swim at our house. And if you drive down Indian Trail Drive at 7 o'clock on a weekday morning, you're going to see a lot of cars parked in front of our house because we don't let them park in the driveway. And we have a great time with it, and it's so convenient for me. I don't have to go and search out pools. We're of course only open 5 months a year in this climate, so we're now back to the indoor season. Both Lydia and I swam this morning at the Y in Wayne. I swam 148 laps, just a little over 2 miles this morning. Lydia, you probably swam about a mile. Right. So my addiction was contagious. Lydia caught it, and she swims now 2 or 3 times a week during the season when our pool's open. It's easy, but we both have to find other places to swim during the indoor season. And when we travel, the first thing we ask when we're finding a hotel or a rental house, do they have a pool? And we try and function around that. Lydia actually competed for a while because she started hanging around with the swimmers that compete in these masters meets, and she would come as a spectator, and of course got sucked right in, I guess about 10 years ago, and she became a really good swimmer, and she did well. There's a photo of her over here with a meet in I think it was Sarasota, and you can see her smiling with a big grin with the medal hanging around her neck. But competition wasn't for her. She couldn't deal with this. I shouldn't say couldn't deal, didn't want to deal with the stress of competition. I remember, I think the first meet that she competed in was in Fort Lauderdale at the International Hall of Fame swimming pool. And one of the things that I do before a competition, we always take it pretty serious, is for instant energy. They have these energy gels. They're mostly just caffeine, sweetened caffeine. And I said, here, try this. So she did, and she was so wired. It was like somebody took a 33 1/3 RPM record and all of a sudden turned it up to 78. And she was going a mile a minute. And I had told her, as did, she had a million coaches because all of the people in our swimming group were coaching her. She was swimming that day, I think either 100 freestyle or a 200 freestyle. And she was told, and she knew because she practiced, she had to pace herself to get through the race. But she was so wound up. She swam the first 50 yards of that 8-lap, 200-yard freestyle faster than she had ever done it when she was only swimming 50, because she was so wound up. And she did well. She finished the race. But the next year, when we coaxed her into doing it in Sarasota, she knew that that was her retirement swim. And her competitive swimming career is finished. So I'm going to start winding up. In 1993, when I was 48 years old, I connected with a master's program in the West Orange JCC with a real serious coach, and started to compete seriously with that group. And every year, the big meet would be the YMCA Nationals, which were held 1 year in Fort Lauderdale, 1 year in Sarasota, 1 year in Indianapolis, and different places. And, really got back into it, and rose to pretty much the top by being ranked in my events. 1 year, I was ranked first for a couple of years, 2 or 3. And the big thing is to be in the top 10. I'm usually often in the top tier, which really means a top 5. And I'm still at it. I'm not sure when I'm going to compete again. There's a meet on the 20th of this month that I'm vacillating about. I don't think I'm going to get it together because I was out of the pool. We were just down our place in St. John. We were swimming in the ocean every day, but I missed my training. So I'll probably, find some other meets to swim in the middle of the winter or the springtime to keep at it. And that's my story. I don't know how interesting it was for you to hear about it. But for me to have an opportunity to talk about it was an interesting challenge. And I brought some stuff over here. Those of you who are watching remotely, Tridena, I saw your name before. I don't know if you're still there, but you've seen.
I'm here, Dad. I'm here.
But you've seen all of this stuff.
Your favorite child.
Yep. I've got my All-American plaques, certificates from high school and college. I've got my Olympic trial certificate. I've got some pictures of me standing on the podium at the FINA World Championships in Italy. I've got a great picture of Lydia with the medal around her neck. I've got a picture of me at the University of Cincinnati pool when I was about 20 years old and had quite the physique in that photo. And I've got a picture of me standing on the podium with the gold medal around my neck at the Maccabi Games in Israel. I brought 2 medals, and I brought a lot of these little patches that sometimes you get when you win the sew on your jackets. And there's a great picture of the team that I swam for. I probably had about 80 or 90 swimmers, but 8 or 10 of us were eligible for the Olympic trials in '64. It's a picture there with our coach and the 3 of that group that actually made the Olympics team in '64. So most of you have already wandered around that table. And before I sit down and have the rest of my bagel, any questions? If you don't get nervous, you don't get the adrenaline going. And if you don't get nervous before a competition, then you shouldn't be competing. And the nervousness, the jitters that you refer to, doesn't feel good. And, one of the things it's like a repeat performance with all of my swimming buddies. Before a meet, when we're sitting there nervous, waiting for our event, we look at each other and say, why are we doing this? And if we had a good event when the meet's over, we know why we did it. And the high, the ecstasy from it far outweighs any negatives. But in order to have that one good moment during competition, you're talking about hundreds of days in the pool or in the weight room training for it. And that's just the way of life. So Lydia didn't take kindly to that tension. And I can't tell you that I do, but I'm prepared to cope with it and know that it's important. So it works for us. So the short answer is yes. Well, I was talking before about turbulence. So a fast pool is one that stays calm. And even when there's, 8 swimmers, some of the pools are 8 lanes, the competition pools are 8 lanes. So even when you have 8 swimmers churning away, they still don't have a wake in their face because the pool stays calm. So a fast pool is one that's designed to absorb the waves because, when you swim, you create turbulence. If it just goes out when it hits the wall, it comes right back. So, yes, yeah. Our pool, there are a couple of ways to do it, has an overflow system. So the waves, as they hit the wall, just wash right out. And it's designed so that the decks are tilted a little bit. So they then flow back into a drain that wraps around the entire pool and takes the water into a holding tank. And then it comes back in through a filter. A lot of the real fast pools have a gutter system where the gutter actually catches the wave and then it doesn't let it wash back. And they also have lanes, high tech, that are called wave eaters. So between those wave eaters and the pool absorbing the waves, and the fast pools are deep because a shallow pool, our pool at home is shallow for a number of reasons, but a real serious fast pool is real deep, 8-10 feet, because then the water that you're pushing down doesn't bounce off the bottom and come back up at you. And a fast pool doesn't make a huge difference in the times, but now the competition is such that 1/100th of a second makes the difference. And so every advantage that you can get, but of course, the swimmer next to you in the fast pool has the same advantage that you do. So there are fast suits, and there's, other techniques, shaving your body, etc. And so we built a fast pool in our backyard.
Question on swimming from Scott Hughes. How has your swimming discipline translated into your legal career?
It's a good question, Scott. It transferred into not just my legal career, into life. It taught me to persevere, to be tenacious, and knowing that hard work pays off has just really enabled me to move forward in a lot of different facets of my life, particularly in my legal career, where in order to succeed, you have to be competitive. And I had a real advantage being competitive in sports the moment I set foot into a courtroom. So for me, swimming has provided all the fodder that I needed. And it also has been, my elixir to try and stay healthy, which is also helps in the legal career. Thank you very much. Thank you, Raul.
I want to build on that. This is remarkable, you read about champions, you get statistics, you hear about it. But to understand a personal journey is so much more meaningful. Because as we're talking, I'm thinking every great tennis player or baseball player, they all have their own journey. It's not like one size fits all and it's ups and downs. So getting the insights of your personal story really is very meaningful. I hope you do something with all those notes. Lydia, balls in your court. Because it's remarkable. It really does give insights and information. And actually, my question is, how much of a champion is innate? How much is learned? I mean, I'm sure the answer is both. But you had skill. So do you have to have a skill in order to become a champion? Where's the combination?
Well, you've already answered the question, Sharon, because it's a combination of both. Somebody without the innate talent, no matter how hard they train, are only going to go so far. And so a lot of people waste their talent because it's not enough just to have the talent. You have to have the attitude, the drive. And if you have a combination of both, sometimes you're in the perfect storm, which is a good thing, and the timing is right. And I was fortunate enough to have the talent, but I was a little unfortunate. And after I went to the right college to swim, I lost the coach, and it was too late for me by the time I figured out what I needed to do something about it. But I have no regrets. Just another comment about, you hope Lydia does something with these notes. The truth is, due to Lydia's encouragement, about a year ago or 2 years ago, she suggested that I write down my swimming story so that my children, hi Jordana, when I'm gone, would understand, because they had heard about this one and that day, and I put it all together. That story, which you've seen a copy of it, and Susan has seen a copy of it, really served as the template for my notes for today. So next thing that I have to take Lydia's advice on is talking about the will, not the will where we're going to leave our stuff to our kids. What's the will, Lydia? The will that you want us both to participate in about sharing our values with our.
Just writing up some things, but I have a funny story to tell everyone. So I encouraged Jack to write this sort of swim bio. And really the reason why is that last year, I didn't get to do it last year, but I did this year for his birthday. You can online and you can get celebrities to send you birthday notes to friends and kids and everything. I mean, all kinds of Kenny G does it. You go online and you do these cameos. Well, there's a whole section for swimmers. Famous. And I didn't do it last year, but Jack didn't know that this year I went on to see what swimmers were going to be there, and we picked out Cody Miller, who is about must be in his 20s.
He's in his mid-20s. He's an Olympic swimmer.
The kids, and he does this great talks. And here I arranged for him to do a talk for Jack. And I sent him a lot of his, all of his bio. And that's why I really need it to say, oh, this, and he was all American, he's been whatever. Anyway, he came back with this incredible, I really should share it with everyone. This message we surprised him on Saturday in August. All the swimmers were around, and we played this for him, and he did such a fabulous message for Jack. He started it by saying, I will never get to student for somebody who has more swimming experience than me. And it was really such a wonderful.
Sure, we were in the pool and Lydia had her laptop out there. So we're actually in the pool watching Cody Miller talk to me.
It
was
such
great.
A wonderful message from somebody who's today and appreciate everything that he's done all these years. And it was a great, a great video.
Thank you, Lydia. It was great.
I have a copy of what you wrote. Oh, that's what it was, yeah.
So I think we're done. Anybody have any more comments or pearls of wisdom? Thank you for those of you who are tuned in remotely.
Thank you all. We've got one more. Yeah, one come up to the. I think this microphone is picking up. The voice here.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. Oh, I'm here. So much. Is this yours?
Yeah.
For presenting your story to us. We knew you were great. Now we know you're even greater than that. And we have one more program for the fall. Unfortunately, there's a 2-week break. So don't forget that November 30th, Thursday, November 30th, Rabbi Weiland is going to give a presentation on the Tzaddik.
Tuesday.
Did I say Tuesday? Did I say anything? It's a Wednesday. It's a,
Yeah.
no, I said November 30th.
Okay.
Did I say whatever, and it's November, anyway, it's November 30th. It's Wednesday. It's on our usual schedule. It's on the temple newsletter,
You said about Sadek,
the Tzaddik in
18.
Yeah.
They're 18 Sadek walking around the planet.
right, but this is the Tzaddik, and so he's going, or the Tzaddik, and he's going to be talking about the relationship and